Well, thank you so much, Giovanna and Bruna, for the wonderful reading. So, good evening, everyone, and good afternoon to Giovanna in Brazil, Bruna Dantas Lobato in the US, and anyone joining us from the other time zones. Welcome to the session of PINT, this session, Portuguese in Translation Book Club. It's a real pleasure to have you all with us today. I'd like to begin by thanking Giovana Madalosso and Bruna Dantas Lobato for joining us to talk about the Tokyo Suite, a suite to Tokyo. We are delighted to have the opportunity to hear the author and the translator to discuss the novel and its journey into English. I'd also like to thank our interpreters for making this conversation accessible to everyone. And of course, to thank you all, our readers, for being here. So Francisco and I will be moderating this event, but we very much want this to be a conversation. So please feel free to ask questions, to share your comments as we go along. You can either make it, share questions in Portuguese or in English, whichever language you prefer. And you can raise your virtual hand or your physical hand, or just write your question in the chat box. So thank you all for being here. And I'd like to start by asking Giovanna a question. Giovanna, can I ask you in English? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So Giovanna, I'm just wondering, the Tokyo Suite deals with very serious themes, motherhood, class, domestic labor, social inequality, but it also has a great deal of humor. So what I'd like to know, if was that a balance there from the beginning? Did you have this idea of dealing with this very important and serious issues with a lot of humor from the beginning? You had this idea, and how did you come about writing this book?
Bom, obrigada pela pergunta. Vou
First of
começar
all, thank you
pela
very much
primeira,
for your
depois,
question. I'm
quer
going to
dizer, tudo
start by
meio
the
junto.
first one and then mix
Mas,
it all
na
together
verdade,
a
foi o
little bit, of course.
contrário. Eu até
Actually, it was
planejei
the
escrever esse
opposite.
livro com menos humor do que eu costumo
The
escrever. Porque
first
eu
idea was to
escrevi,
write
eu
this book
lancei
with
primeiro um
less
livro de
humor than what I
contos que
did,
já
because
tinha
my
uma voz
first idea
narrativa
was
com
to
humor.
write a book
Depois
of
o meu
a
primeiro
short
romance, que tem
novel,
um humor bem
and then
ácido, assim, quase
afterwards
negro.
I
E
started
quando eu fui
writing my
escrever Sweet
first
Tóquio, na
novel,
verdade,
which
o
was
plano
very
que eu
dark.
tinha
It was
era o
not
seguinte:
very
eu
full
pensei,
of
eu vou
humor.
escrever, eu preciso
And then when I
distinguir muito
started
bem
writing
uma
the
voz
Tokyo
narrativa da
Suite,
outra.
I decided
Quando
that I
eu
wanted to write
optei por
in a way that I
escrever
had
as
two
duas,
different
né, duas
voices,
narradoras, duas
because I
vozes em
have
primeira
two
pessoa,
women
essa
telling their
mãe e essa
stories. I
babá,
have twice here this
eu
first
pensei que eu
person
teria que
speaking, the
trabalhar,
mother and
né,
the
em
nanny.
toda uma
So
linguagem,
my
toda
idea
uma
was that I really needed
sintaxe, um
to
vocabulário
work and to
específico para
find a
cada uma dessas
language,
mulheres.
a
E no
vocabulary, a
intuito de achar
syntax,
vozes
everything for
narrativas
each of
bem
these two
distintas,
women.
eu pensei em
And
fazer o
this was
quê?
my goal, so I
Primeiro, trabalhar a
decided to
pontuação, né? Então, a
start
mãe
working with
tem muitos pontos,
punctuation.
a
So
babá
the
tem mais
mother
vírgulas,
has
né? Uma
lots of
linguagem um
full
pouco mais
stops, and the
ofegante.
nanny
Eu uso
speaks
termos
with
regionais
a lot more
diferentes para uma e para
commas.
outra. A Fernanda
Regionally,
vai
their language is
abordar
also very different. So
a
Fernanda, the
sexualidade com
mother,
palavras mais cruas, mais
talks
diretas,
about her
a babá com
sexuality
eufemismos.
with more direct
Então, eu
words,
pensei no
whereas the
humor. E
nanny
eu pensei,
uses
puxa, eu acho que o
euphemisms for
humor também é um
everything.
jeito de eu distinguir
And in
uma
the
voz da
end, I
outra. Eu vou
came up with
escrever
humor
uma com
because I
humor
realized that
e
this was
outra sem
also a
humor.
way
E
to
foi nesse momento em que eu
differentiate
decidi
those two
escrever uma
voices.
voz
One of
narrativa
them was
sem
going to have
humor
more humor,
que eu
and the other
descobri que eu sou
one
incapaz
would
de
be a
fazer
little more
isso.
serious. And when I
Eu não
decided
tenho
to try to
como.
do that, I
Isso é uma
realized
coisa
that I
muito
was not
minha.
able to
Eu
do
acho
it.
que é minha como
It's
escritora da minha voz
something
narrativa,
that
é
is
minha
a
na minha
part of
vida,
my
no dia a dia,
way of being in
principalmente
my
quando as
life
coisas
as a
ficam mais
writer.
complicadas e
The
tristes e difíceis
most
na vida e na
complicated
literatura, eu tenho a
topics
tendência
awake this
a
humor in
lançar mão do
me,
humor.
if it's in
Deixa eu finalizar
literature
uma
or
leitura.
in life.
E, bom, voltando, então eu descobri que eu não conseguia
So,
escrever sem humor.
what I
Então, o que eu
realized
fiz
was
foi
that I was
fatiar
not
o meu
able to
humor ao
write
meio.
without
Eu
humor.
decidi
So, my
trabalhar com
decision
humor
was
um
to
pouco mais irônico
share
e
it, like to
sarcástico na
divide it,
Fernanda
to be
e
more
com humor mais
sarcastic
espontâneo na
in the
Maju.
voice of Fernanda
Tem
and
uma
more
frase de
spontaneous in
um
humor
escritor do
when Maju
Carrett,
is
né, o escritor
speaking.
israelense que eu sempre
There's a
cito, que eu adoro,
sentence
que ele
written by
fala que o
Carrot,
humor é
a
como uma
writer
luva,
from
né?
Israel,
Sabe quando
and
você
he
vai pegar
says that
alguma
humor
coisa no
is like a
forno e tem que se
glove. You know,
proteger
when
com
you're
aquela
like
luva?
about to grab something hot coming out of the oven and you need this protection gloves. This is what humor is. That's how it works. It's something that you use to protect yourself whenever you're going to get hurt. So it is part of my own style, the way I deal with complicated topics. And the second question, how I came about, how this book came about, it came from very personal, hurtful situations, difficult situations. My daughter's birth that brought me to a difficult situation. I didn't really have a network to provide support. I was in São Paulo and my daughter was very small, very little, and I started like calling nannies and trying to find help. And then the very first day I had to like leave my daughter with this unknown person who just started working at home. And I went to work and I started wondering, okay, what could happen? Could she just take my kid away and never come back? So it was a very, very concrete situation that brought me to the idea of this book. So it was not only that as a mother, this maternity, but it was also all the experiences that came along with it. I was watching the nannies walking around in my neighborhood, which is like a high class neighborhood in São Paulo. And that's a moment when I realized how many nannies were wandering around. And that's why I call them the White Army. And I usually say also that they're like a transparent army. We don't see them, it's see through. It's millions of people who are taking care of these children constantly and who are not seen by society. So when I started going to these squares, to these playgrounds with my daughter, I started listening to the stories these women told me, and I realized that those stories should become literature.